envelope of our friend had been so well stuffed with all of this, as well as with a few memories relating to his parents, that this particular swan had become a complete and living being, and I have the impression of leaving one person to go to another distinct from him, when in my memory I passed from the swan I knew later with accuracy to that first swan in who I rediscovered the charming mistakes of my youth, and who in fact resembles less the other swan than he resembles the other people I knew at the time, as though one's life were like a museum in which all the portraits from one period have a family look about them, a single tonality, to that first swan abounding in leisure, fragrant with the smell of the tall chestnut tree, the basket of raspberries, and a sprig of tarragon. Yet one day, when my grandmother had gone to ask a favor from the lady she had known at the Sacré-Cœur, and with whom, because of our notion of castes, she had not wished to remain in close contact despite a reciprocal congeniality. This lady, the Marquis de Villeparisis, of the famous de Villon family, had said to her, "I believe you know Monsieur Swann very well. He is a great friend of my nephew and niece, the Delhomes," and my grandmother had returned from her visit full of enthusiasm for the house, which overlooked some gardens in which Madame de Villeparisis had advised her to rent a flat, and also for a waistcoat maker and his daughter, who kept a shop in the courtyard, where she had gone to ask them to put a stitch in her skirt, which he had torn in the stairwell. My grandmother had found these people wonderful, and she declared that the girl was a gem, and the waistcoat maker was most distinguished, the finest man she had ever seen, because for her distinction was something absolutely independent of social position. She went into ecstasies over an answer the waistcoat maker had given her, saying to Maman, "C'est bien, couldn't have said it any better," and in contrast of a nephew of Madame de Villeparisis, whom she had met at the house, "Oh, my dear daughter, how common he is." Now the remark about Swann had the effect, not of raising him in my great-aunt's enthusiasm, but of lowering Madame de Villeparisis. It seems that the respect which, on my grandmother's faith, we accorded Madame de Villeparisis created a duty on her part to do nothing that would make her less worthy, a duty in which she had failed by learning of Swann's existence, by permitting relatives of hers to associate with him. What? She knows Swann, a person you claim is a relation of Maréchal de Macmahon. My family's opinion regarding Swann's association seemed confirmed later by his marriage to a woman of the worst social station, practically a cocotte, whom, what was more, he never attempted to introduce, continuing to come to our house alone, though less and less, but from whom they believed they could judge, assuming it was there that he had found her, the social circle unknown to them that he habitually frequented. But one time my grandfather read in a newspaper that Monsieur Swann was one of the most faithful guests at the Sunday lunches given by Duc d'Aix, whose father and uncle had been the most prominent statesmen in the reign of Louis Philippe. Now my grandfather was interested in all the little facts that could help him enter imaginatively into the private lives of men like Molay, the Duc Pesquier, and the Duc de Broglie. He was delighted to learn that Swann associated with people who had known them. My great-aunt, however, interpreted this news in a sense unfavorable to Swann. Anyone who chose his associates outside the caste into which he had been born, outside of his social class, suffered in her eyes a regrettable lowering of his social position. It seemed to her that he gave up forthwith the fruits of all good relations with well-placed people so honorably preserved, and stored away for their children by foresightable families. My great-aunt had even stopped seeing the son of a lawyer we knew because he had married royalty, and was therefore, in her opinion, demoted from the respected ranks of a lawyer's son to that of one of those adventurers, former valets or stable boys, on whom they say that queens sometimes bestow their favors. She disapproved of my grandfather's plan to question Swann. The next evening he was to come to dinner about these friends of his we had discovered. At the same time, my grandmother's two sisters, old maids who shared their notability of character, but not her sort of mind, declared they could not understand what pleasure their brother-in-law could take in talking about such foolishness. They were women of lofty aspirations, who for that very reason were incapable of taking an interest in what is known as tittle-tattle, even if it had some historic interest, and more generally in anything that was not directly connected to an aesthetic or moral subject. The disinterestedness of their minds was such with respect to all that, closely or distantly, seemed connected with worldly matters, that their sense of hearing, having finally understood that its temporary uselessness, when the conversation at dinner assumed a tone that was frivolous or merely pedestrian, without these two old spinsters being able to lead it back to the subjects dear to them, would suspend the function of its receptive organs and allow them to begin to atrophy. If my grandfather needed to attract the two sisters' attention at any such times, he had to resort to those bodily signals used by alienists with certain lunatics suffering from distraction, striking a glass repeatedly with the blade of a knife while speaking to them sharply and looking them suddenly in the eye. Violent methods which these psychiatrists often bring with them into their ordinary relationships with healthy people, either from professional habit or because they believe everyone is a little crazy. They were more interested when, the day before Swann was to come to dinner, and had personally sent them a case of Asti wine, my aunt holding a copy of the Figaro, in which, next to the title of a painting in an exhibition Corot, these words appeared, from the collection of Monsieur Charles Swann. Did you see this? Swann is on the front page news of the Figaro. But I've always told you he had a great deal of taste, said my grandmother. Of course you would. Anything so long as your opinion is not the same as ours, answered my great-aunt, who, knowing that my grandmother was never of the same opinion as she, and not being quite sure that she herself was the one we always declared was right, wanted to extract from us a general condemnation of my grandmother's convictions against when she was trying to force us into solidarity with her own. But we remained silent. When my grandmother's sisters expressed their intention of speaking to Swann about this mention in the Figaro, my great-aunt advised them against it. When she saw in others an advantage, however small, that she did not have, she persuaded herself that it was not an advantage but a detriment, and she pitied them so as not to envy them. I believe you would not be pleasing him at all. I am quite sure I would find it very unpleasant to see my name printed boldly like that in the newspaper, and I would not be at all gratified if someone spoke to me about it. But she did not persist in trying to convince my grandmother's sisters, for they, in their honor of vulgarity, had made such a fine art of concealing personal allusion beneath ingenious circumlocutions that it often went unnoticed, even by the person to whom it was addressed. As for my mother, she thought only of trying to persuade my father to agree to talk to Swann, not about his wife, but about his daughter, whom he adored, because of whom it was said he had finally entered into this marriage. You might just say a word to him. Just ask him how she is. it might be so hard for him. But my father would become annoyed. No, you have the most absurd ideas. It would be ridiculous. The only one of us for whom Swan's arrival became the object of painful preoccupation was I. This was because on the evenings when strangers, or merely Monsieur Swann, were present, Maman did not come up to my room. I had dinner before everyone else, and afterward I came and sat at the table until 8 o'clock, when it was understood that I had to go upstairs. The precious and fragile kiss that Maman usually entrusted to me in my bed when I was going to sleep, I would have to convey from the dining room table to my bed and protect during the whole time I undressed, so that its sweetness would not shatter, so that its volatile essence would not disperse and evaporate. And on precisely those evenings, when I needed to receive it with more care, I had to take it, I had to snatch it brusquely, publicly, without even having the time and the freedom of mind necessary to bring to what I was doing the attention of those individuals controlled by some mania, who do their utmost not to think of anything else while they are shutting the door, so as to be able, when the morbid uncertainty returns to them, to confront it victoriously with the memory of the moment when they did shut the door. We were all in the garden when the 2 hesitant rings of the doorbell sounded. We knew it was Swann. Even so, we all looked one another questioningly, and my grandmother was sent on reconnaissance.